Welcome to Second Saturday Conversation. Here we explore Christianity in the 21st century, which is a bit of a mess. Christianity in the 21st century is a bit of a broken vessel, I would say. And we also explore Christianity for the 21st century, which is yet to be. Our overall title for this program year is Through a Glass Darkly, which is an image from St. Paul. More numerous of windows, superior for doors, which is an image from a poem by Emily Dickinson. And I will say more about that overarching title for this year in May. But fortunately, the title for today's session is much more direct. Excuse me, interrupting on behalf of justice. And today we have a special guest, Robin Meyers. Marcus was a great admirer of Robin and his work. He loved his rhetorical skill, his passion, his prophetic insistence, and how he brought all of those gifts to his life as a senior pastor in a church. He was pastor at Mayflower Congregational UCC Church of Oklahoma City for 35 years. He brought all those gifts to his life in the academy. He brought those gifts to his life as a professor at the Oklahoma City University. He taught and continues to teach social justice and ethics and public speaking. He's a fellow of the West Star Institute. Marcus was part of that, as you know, and Robin continues to be a participant in West Star. And West Star is a great friend of Second Saturday Conversation. Before Mark died, he said to me, keep your eye on Robin, on what he is doing, because he is an important voice. So his eye was on the robin, to borrow from his eye was on a sparrow. A number of Robin's books were written before Mark died, and Mark read all of them. And after reading The Underground Church, Reclaiming the Subversive Way of Jesus, Marcus wrote this about that book. He said, read this book, written by a wordsmith. It is a passionate and challenging call to churches to be liberated from the cultural captivity of convention and into the underground church. Robin has acknowledged that Marcus was an influence on him, but let me say to you that Robin was an influence on Marcus. They both saw Jesus as a subversive, and along with Mary Oliver, tender and luminous and demanding, as he always was, 1,000 times more frightening than the killer sea. In a moment, I'm going to welcome Robin to the screen, but first, I'd like Jake to orient us just a little bit to the icons at the bottom of your screen for our plenary time. After Robin has shared some of his thoughts, we'll go into plenary, which is an opportunity for all of you to ask questions or make a comment and respond to Robin's thoughts today. Okay, so Jake, would you say a little bit about where the raising your hand icon is and the mute button?
Sure. So across the bottom of the screen under the video, there should be a button that says react. And if you interact with that button, a little menu will come up and there's a button there that says raise hand. And if you click on that or tap on that, then a little hand will show next to your name in the participant list. And when plenary rolls around, we can use that to call on people. So, oh, and the list the order of the names of people with their hands up might be different on your screen. So if you thought you were up next and we call somebody else, please don't be offended. We saw the other person at the top of our list. So
Great. That's perfect, Jake. Thanks so much.
Yep.
Yeah, our friend and my colleague, Jeff Creswell, who usually helps us with plenary, can't be here today. So Jake will help to orient us to that. So in welcoming Robin, let me read a quote from Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King writes, "Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right?" And then there comes a time, writes Martin Luther King, when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because one's conscience tells us that it is right. So we are so fortunate to have with us today Robin Meyers to help us in this moment when, as Robin says, the good, the true, and the just are being disassembled right before our eyes. Can I get an excuse me? Interrupting on behalf of justice. Let us welcome Robin Meyers. Hi, Robin.
Hi. Great to be here. I want to begin by saying how much I appreciate and am honored by this invitation to spend time sharing some ideas with you, and for the trust Marianne has placed in me to speak my mind, hopefully without getting us all arrested. Although
I did say to Robin earlier this morning, I'm not worried about that. Let's get arrested. As I said to Robin, we'd be sharing good company.
and I mean, this is me trying to be funny, but I'm not so certain anymore what tomorrow holds with respect to those of us who hold unconventional or unorthodox religious ideas in America. We'll see. But I think I speak for all of us when I say we will not be silent. I'm also very pleased to be speaking at a time marking the 10th anniversary of the death of Marcus Borg, a man who changed both my way of thinking and my way of expressing the things he helped me to think. As someone who has studied and lived a life shaped by rhetoric, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but Marcus Borg was a unique combination of intellectual candor and unwavering grace. Unlike the age in which we are living, he was never mean or judgmental toward anyone who held different opinions or beliefs about God, Jesus, the church, or anything else for that matter, but was always gentle in his way of suggesting new ideas, in no small part because he had been on quite a journey himself. And so he could empathize, you all remember empathy, I'm sure, with those who grew up as he did in a small town in North Dakota, but who may never have been given a safe and supportive space in which to think new thoughts. As you know, it is not just what we say, but how we say it that matters, and Marcus knew that concept and capacity are not the same thing, because knowledge alone is not redemptive. To put this in another way, no one becomes gracious just by reading a good book on grace, but by being gracious, by acting graciously. To put it simply, what I'm saying is that Marcus impacted so many people, not just because he had a big mind, but because he had an even a bigger heart. 10 years ago, when the West Star Institute was looking for ways to remember him and to honor him, I wrote a short tribute that I'd like to share with you before I get into my own stuff this morning. This was written not long after he died, and I called it "Class is Not Dismissed." This is how it went. Dear Professor Borg, it is more than reasonable to assume that your class has now been canceled under the circumstances, but not so fast. You know perfectly well that when students go on discussing big ideas after the death of their teacher and acting on them, the absence of the teacher's body becomes superfluous. What is Easter, after all, but deathless devotion to deathless truth? As one of your students who audited your class by reading your books, I can testify to this miraculous fact by sharing a true story. In the late 1980s, a young man sat in a classroom at the University of Oregon, enrolled in an Introduction to Bible class. He was waiting for the teacher to show up, but he was half asleep with low expectations in a university where carrying a Bible around was not cool. Eugene, Oregon is where old hippies go to die. When the professor did show up, however, he did not look like his faculty photo. Instead, in walked this rather slight, bookish-looking chap with a scraggly beard and a tweed jacket, and he introduced himself as Professor Marcus Borg. He set down his books and notes, and he said this: "Your regular professor is ill with cancer, and I'm going to teach this class in his regrettable absence. I teach at Oregon State University, but I have some expertise in this area, so here we go." My friend thought to himself, great, a substitute teacher for a Bible class. What's the good news? As the semester progressed, however, it turned out that there was lots of good news. Most of it in the form of teaching and learning that was thoughtful, lucid, perceptive, disturbingly organized, and spiritually contagious. Apparently, my friend reported, you could ask Dr. Borg any question and he would never make you feel like an idiot. What's more, you didn't have to memorize things, but you did have to confront and consider things. In that class, taught by a substitute teacher we all know and love, seeds were planted that blossomed years later for this student. He returned to Oklahoma City, got married, had 2 sons, and joined my church. One day after the service, he met me in the middle aisle of the sanctuary and proclaimed that he was going to seminary. I said what I always say when people announce they are going to seminary: only if you cannot help yourself. Apparently, he could not. In those days, as a gift to new members, I would give away copies of a slim volume written by Marcus Borg called Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time. And that's when the author's former student told me about meeting him for the first time. He then became my associate minister and is now the senior minister of Fellowship Congregational Church in Tulsa, Chris Moore. And he is one of the most thoughtful, lucid, perceptive, disturbingly organized, and spiritually contagious pastors in the progressive Christian movement. You see how it works, Marcus? You may not be able to teach the class in person anymore, but your class is not dismissed. The Marcus Borg Foundation plans to gather a small army of substitutes who will teach the class in your regrettable absence. We will begin with an admission that we are not you, but that thanks to you, we also have some expertise in these matters. Perhaps you thought that death would cancel such an important class, but if so, you were mistaken. We all listened, took notes, and learned. Deathless devotion to deathless truth was on the final exam. And thanks to you, we all passed. Rest in peace, Marcus. Your class is not dismissed. Okay, so forgive me that little walk down memory lane, but like so many of you who are listening to me right now, the work goes on, and somewhere Professor Borg is saying, I'm Marcus Borg and I approve this message. So here's what I want to talk to you about this morning, and if you'll excuse me, I want to begin with a rather startling statement. We are running out of time. I never thought I'd start a lecture this way. It sounds so apocalyptic, so alarmist, so much like the cartoon of the man wearing one of those sandwich signboards that reads, "Repent, the end is near." Except for this, it really feels that way to me. Maybe it feels that way to some of you. I hope I'm wrong, but just in case, I hope you will hear me out and regard this moment and our time together as a way to honor not only Marcus Borg, but the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And Marianne and I did not coordinate this by considering not just what it meant, but what it means today to talk about the fierce urgency of now. You may have noticed that now does indeed feel fiercely urgent. If I step on any political toes today, I'm sorry, but under the circumstances, I don't really care anymore. If what I say in the name of Jesus is offensive, I would be far more concerned if what I said in the name of the one arrested and executed by the state never offended anyone. My experience of the clergy as a group is that we often go into ministry with both a well-developed sense of self, a desire for self-display, and a strong need to be, if not loved by everyone, at least liked by most people. The problem is that if you set out to be liked by almost everyone in the preaching of a gospel that was called the great offense, then we end up being truly respected by almost no one. Perhaps, in fact, we were given a hint about what it would mean to drink from this cup when Jesus said, "I come not to bring peace, but a sword." That is, I must admit, not one of my favorite passages. In fact, once, years ago, I thought it would be fun to preach a series of sermons under the rubric, "Things I Wish Jesus Had Never Said." The only problem was there were so many of them, the sermon series looked like it would go on forever. I should have just stopped at "Pray for your enemies and those who persecute you," and said, "I give up, I can't do this." Which is kind of how I felt when I woke up on the morning after the election, to learn that we, the majority of those who voted, had decided to elect the first convicted felon as president of the United States before we would elect the first woman. And my wife, Sean, who is the spiritual mother superior in our house, said, quote, "Robin, are you going to pray for him?" Which, now that I think about it, ranks right up there with things I wish my wife had never said. Not long ago, I returned to my alma mater, Phillips Theological Seminary, to remember how I was shaped by my theological education there. One day in the fall of 1976, my first semester, the seminary gave a few of us an excused absence so we could go on a little field trip to Enid, Oklahoma, from Enid down to Oklahoma City, to meet a peanut farmer from Plains, Georgia, who was making his only campaign appearance in a state he knew he would never win. He was, in fact, the last presidential candidate to campaign in Oklahoma. Several of us hopped in the car, made the drive down. We got in line to shake his hand, and he looked each one of us squarely in the eye and smiled that toothy grin. "I'm Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president. What's your name?" Where have people like Jimmy Carter gone? We are running out of time. When this invitation came from Marianne, I was reading a new book forthcoming by a professor at Phillips named Joe Bessler. The book is entitled "Being Moved by Moving Words," which is a rhetorical analysis of the work of John Caputo, a philosopher, theologian you're all familiar with, whose work is increasingly important to so many of us. And in it, Joe cited from the work of a rhetorical scholar named Thomas Farrell, to whom I owe this aha moment that is my call for Second Saturday Conversations, as in a call in search of a response, which is something that's very hard to do on Zoom. I love call and response preaching. I like it when people talk back right in the middle of the sermon. It proves they have a pulse. It proves that they are not bystanders, in the proclamation of the good news, but partners, as if, rhetorically speaking, the church is like a co-op and we are all part owners. For example, I remember the first time very early in my ministry that I preached in a predominantly black church in Detroit. And about halfway through the sermon, the matriarch of the congregation, a woman who sat in the front row, in her chair, no doubt, wearing this outrageous red hat, the kind of hat that starts way over here and goes up here and then way over there. And she suddenly shouted out in the middle of my rather pale sermon, she said, "Oh, Lordy, you have done gone and said it now." That's right, young preacher man, you have done gone and said it now. Well, I really had no idea what it was that I had done gone and said, but I did realize something very important in that moment, namely that in the black church, the gospel is not private property. It is community property. The preacher does not own it. The preacher just turns it loose and then everyone has a shot at it. So here is my personal epiphany that I hope we can make a collective epiphany this morning as we all try to figure out what to say and to do at a moment like this. Farrell said that rhetoric seeks to, quote, challenge and change the normative content in any system, and that this is a dangerous undertaking. Bessler adds, quote, here the spiritual and the political begin to weave together, and an audience of resistance informed by a commitment to the unconditionality of justice begins to emerge. I hope you heard that across your ear, the unconditionality of justice, because I think that's a flag we can all march under. I know how often those of you out there who are clergy have been told not to preach politics from the pulpit. No politics from the pulpit, please. So I say, don't. Preach unconditional justice from the pulpit, and you can be assured that it will have political consequences. Tell your congregation that you will never tell them who to vote for or who God thinks you should vote for, but that otherwise almost everything Jesus said and did was political. That is, if you define the political not in partisan terms, but rather this way: who has the power, how is it exercised, and to what effect on God's children and God's creation. Tell them that by virtue of being ordained, you have taken a vow to preach the politics of the gospel. Bessler says that we are called to step out into public life and risk standing for and calling for justice. And Farrell puts this call in a particularly cogent way. He says that since the beginning of the study of the spoken word, rhetoric has been concerned with what he calls magnitude, from the Latin for great, of size or extent. Now, you know, we often use the word greatness these days. Seems to be one of America's favorite words. Who's the GOAT, the greatest of all time? Personally, I think we should move away from MAGA, which, I mean, let's face it, really means make America white again, to a very different kind of greatness that the late Jimmy Carter was known for, namely, make lying wrong again. But here's the aha moment. Farrell speaks about rhetoric in a way I had not heard before, but I wish I had. He argues that rhetoric performs an act of critical interruption, where the taken for granted practices of a culture are concerned. Applied to preaching, one might consider sermons to be acts of divinely inspired interruption. First, to interrupt the idea that the text is a static thing, that it not only meant something, but that it also means something. I've never thought of preaching quite this way, as a divinely inspired interruption on behalf of unconditional justice, but I like it. I think that will preach, don't you? The nativity stories we love are, after all, a cosmic interruption. Jesus himself is a cosmic interruption. I mean, they say nothing good could come out of Nazareth. We interrupt this program to bring you a special bulletin. Shepherds have received the good news ahead of the New York Times. And let's face it, I told my colleagues at Phillips, which has, by the way, the highest number of West Star scholars on its faculty of any seminary in America, we are called to be interrupters. I told them we could even change the name of the seminary to Phillips Theological Interruption. I don't think that's going to happen, but Brandon Scott, for example, who many of you know, taught me that the parable of the leaven is not some harmless little ditty about how we started out small, the church that is, but ended up big, like yeast causes bread to rise. But rather, it is a deeply subversive metaphor comparing the reign of God to unleavened bread, which was a metaphor for moral corruption in those days, revealing a God who is, get this, unclean in a culture with strict purity laws. Brandon might just as well have started off by saying, "Excuse me?" Phillips is also the center of the study of the life of Jesus as deliberately anti-imperial, so that just as Moses came against Pharaoh and Jesus came against Rome, the Jesus followers of the beloved community today are obligated to resist the Pax Americana whenever and wherever our empire, and we do live in an empire, is dealing out injustice and indignity against the many to advance the power and wealth of the few. When you begin to read the New Testament and its often coded language against empire, you realize exactly why Jesus was at first a nuisance and then an unacceptable threat to Rome. And when I hear people say, this doesn't apply because America's not an empire, I say, excuse me? So if you don't mind, let's just make this our simple and common all-purpose expression for divine interruption on behalf of the unconditionality of justice. But first, it's important how we say it. I mean, that is, with what tone of voice. When we bump into someone on the sidewalk, it sounds like this, "Excuse me." But when we are engaged in acts of non-compliance with the principalities and the powers, we should say it this way, "Excuse me?" If I was in a black church right now, I'd say, "Can I get an excuse me?" And I'd get one, or two, or 500. For starters, let's remember how many things we think we know that just ain't so, as we say around here. It's another one of those quotes misattributed to Mark Twain, of which apparently there are millions. The biggest threat to the future of everything these days is that we are lying all the time about almost everything. And even though this undermines the most valuable of all human commodities, trust, there seems to be almost no sanction these days for demonstrable lying. You may have noticed this. You can say the wrong person started a war, and the wrong person is a dictator, and nobody pays the price for it, except for the possible collapse of the world order. We also lie to each other when it comes to what the Greeks called in logic an enthymeme, E-N-T-H-Y-M-E-M-E. It's a word I love so much, I made it my password because no one's ever heard of it and it's not easy to spell. But it's a simple idea. When we say, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, we often just drop the first premise, all men are mortal, because everyone assumes this is true. And so it need not be stated. It is an assumed, unchallenged, major premise, so it's an enthymeme. But what if, in fact, we are busy making all sorts of arguments these days based on assumed premises that are false? Sometimes I ask my students to come up with enthymemes that they believe are not true. And here are a few my students have suggested. More guns will make us safer. Excuse me? Money trickles down. Excuse me? And one of my favorites, the marketplace can solve all the problems of life. Excuse me? You see what my students are doing? I hope they are interrupting. I remember years ago when Jimmy Carter lost his bid for re-election by a landslide to Ronald Reagan, and a commentator asked the following question. So, how is it that we decided to elect a president who divorced his first wife, was a Class B movie actor in Hollywood, and had a profoundly dysfunctional family, over a Baptist Sunday school teacher in a land yearning for the return of family values? Excuse me? Isaiah came up with a strange, interrupting image for the redemption of the world. A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. That's it? That's all you've got? A little green shoot on a dead stump? And what about this whole peaceable kingdom nonsense? All these animals you say will lie around and be nice to each other. These animals do not get along, to put it mildly. Wolves do not lie down with lambs. They have them for breakfast. And then listen to this. They shall not hurt or destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. This may be one of the most powerful lines in Scripture, and if it doesn't give you goosebumps, you may have a defective chiller. I mean, this is beautiful, but then on the other hand, excuse me? Where exactly is this holy mountain? It's not in Gaza, where genocide, war crimes, and now ethnic cleansing are undeniable. It's not in Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin uses civilian apartments for target practice. It's not in Syria, where torture and murder beyond imagining went on for decades. So, pardon the interruption, but where exactly is this mountain on which we will not hurt or destroy? The president wants to close the southern border with Mexico and just erase the northern border with Canada. I mean, this has nothing to do with race, of course. Excuse me? He calls the evangelical Christian base that voted for him overwhelmingly, quote, my beautiful Christians. And they cheer on his retribution and his meanness, as if when one becomes a follower of Jesus, one can also become a gangster. Excuse me? However beautiful we may be, we are not in the retribution business. And as for the mass deportation of our immigrant neighbors, at least those who are not white or supermodels, those original, beautiful Christians have told us that their Lord was born to immigrant parents with no place to lay their heads. So, excuse me, no immigrants, no Jesus, no gospel. I have a brother who lives with his wife and son in Santa Monica, California, and they watched the terrible California wildfires out their window and then left in the middle of the night to drive east into the desert so that they could breathe. Meanwhile, reporters will always ask people, do you think climate change plays any role in all this? And I don't know about all of you out there, but that makes me want to throw a brick at the television. Excuse me? As you know, Christian nationalism is not some future threat. It is here. The Oklahoma Secretary of Education is a man named Ryan Walters, who has made embarrassing national headlines by spending millions of taxpayer dollars to buy 55,000 copies of the Trump Bible and require that they be placed in every public school classroom and then taught. Now, this is personal for me, not just because I live in a country made truly great by making sure we have both freedom of and freedom from religion, but also because Walters graduated from Harding College, a small Christian college in Searcy, Arkansas, where my father once taught and where he was fired for trying to integrate the student body, which did not have a single student of color in the late 1950s, after Brown v. Board of Education. When the college president got word that Robert Meyers, or Bobby Meyers as he was known, my father, he drafted a petition under the title, "A Distinction God Has Not Made," citing Acts 10:34, where Peter says, "I truly understand that God shows no partiality." The president got hold of the copy of the petition, knew my dad had written it, and in a chapel address the next week said that if Harding was to admit black students, the result would be an increase in venereal disease and unwanted pregnancies. Excuse me, I'm trying to look on the bright side, since pastors are, by virtue of their profession, sort of obligated to hope. So I'm wondering if some particularly bright high school student in Oklahoma will have the nerve to ask their teacher about this David and Bathsheba story. Isn't that statutory rape? And why are women the property of their fathers until they become the property of their husbands? Is that a Christian thing? Or in my biology class, we learned that microbes cause disease, not demon possession. So which is it? Oh, and one more question. Why is slavery embraced in the Bible that you require us to read, and that slavery is never renounced? Does this mean God favors slavery? Or just those useful skills that slaves learned according to the revised history curriculum in the state of Florida? Excuse me? You see what I mean when I say we're running out of time. Apparently, a lot of Americans, after dying to get rid of their king, want their king back to make America a monarchy again. And they want America to be rich and powerful again. Two central Christian virtues, as we all know. But didn't our Savior come from a backwater town and lead no armed rebellion? And when he was crucified as a common criminal, forgave his executioners? Excuse me, but I thought the God he revealed was made perfect in weakness. The king-elect says he will issue an edict, which he now has, that God created only two genders, male and female. Excuse me, but where have you been lately? And since we can't seem to stop referring to God as he, then we can only assume that before God created this mythical binary world, he had a talk with Mrs. God about it. Can I get an excuse me? We've got some interrupting to do. The king wants to fight anti-Christian bias, but first he will have to find it. I can tell you without doubt or reservation that in Oklahoma, Christians don't seem particularly oppressed, especially when you consider that in Tulsa, one of the first things people ask strangers they have just met is, "Now, where do you go to church?" As for the women who are dying now because your Supreme Court interrupted their control over their own bodies, I say, excuse me? So I need you, all of you, to be, in your own way, interrupters for the unconditionality of justice. And I need you to interrupt with more than just your words. We need embodied interrupters. So, when they come for your immigrant neighbors, how will you interrupt? When billionaires are put in charge of reducing government waste for other people, but not their own subsidies, how will you interrupt? When science must wear a dunce cap and sit in the corner of the room like a misbehaving child, how will you interrupt? So consider asking this question of yourself and of others. How shall we be divine interrupters in this perishing world? Because we are running out of time. So, to close, let me remind you of what Wordsworth used to say when he first met a friend he hadn't seen for a while. The poet would say this: "What has come clear to you since last we met?" That is a great way to start a conversation about something, anything more important than weather or sports. So here are just a few of the things that have come clear to me since last we met, or even if we've never met. Thanks to the work of people like Marcus Borg and the continuing commitment of Marianne to his important work, and hers as well. My hero of heroes is Jesus of Nazareth, and I believe he came into the world just like we do, and that after death, his fate is exactly the fate that awaits us all. I can worship him, but I can't follow him if he walks on water, because I tried that and I sank. I think that quantum physics, especially something called quantum entanglement, is not just the most important discovery in all of physics, but also a profoundly theological one. If everything really is connected to everything else everywhere all the time, then Paul Tillich was right when he defined sin as separation. I think Christianity was hijacked long ago, when at first you could not be a follower of Jesus and a soldier. And in just a few hundred years, Constantine would bribe his own beautiful Christians by making the way into the only way, and pronounce that only Christians could be Roman soldiers. I think that it is phenomenal to consider that the Sermon on the Mount does not contain a single word about what to believe, only words about what to do and how to be in the world. But that soon after came the Nicene Creed, which was supposed to define Christianity, but if you notice, does not contain a single word about what to do or how to be in the world, but only words about what to believe. Excuse me? And last but not least, remember what Augustine said: "When I read literally, I am slain spiritually." We need more poets in the pulpit and more poetry in our worship services, because otherwise we end up thinking that the Bible is some kind of encyclopedia where we look up information sufficient for salvation, instead of what it is: a song of liberation, a soundtrack for the eternal struggle to be more just, more loving, more compassionate, more merciful, and less cruel, less selfish, less narcissistic. Too many people these days think that going to church means believing things you know are not true in order to get rewards you doubt are available. And to that, all of us can say, "Excuse me? I am trying to be a follower of Jesus. And when he said again and again, 'You have heard it said,' but I say, he was interrupting. the spiritual status quo. And it has been the blessing of my life to try to interrupt on behalf of the unconditionality of justice. And I've got to tell you this, I have drawn inspiration and insight from amazing interrupters like Marcus Borg, whose life and work was grounded in saying graciously, "Excuse me?" So let's carry on his work because, well, it should be obvious at this moment that class is not dismissed. Amen. I got to put on the red glasses now for the plenary.
Great, great. Thank you, Robin. As a reminder to people, Marcus died on the 21st of January, 2015. So it has been 10 years. And in some traditions, the 10th year of remembering a death is particularly poignant because it also indicates what has not only been remembered, but what continues to be lived. And Robin is part of, I mean, his tribute to Marcus today is incredibly moving to me. So thank you for that. And he was right when he said, keep your eye on Robin.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move into plenary time. Let me read our guidelines, which are, this is part of our own hospitality in listening and responding to one another. So as I'm reading that, those of you who are familiar with Second Saturday are very familiar with these guidelines, but let me read them for you. And then this will also just give you a moment to think about what you would like to say in response to Robin and how you'd like to continue this conversation. So let us just take time to become settled in God's presence. And during this plenary time, listen to others with your entire self, with your senses and feelings and intuition and imagination and rational faculties. Don't interrupt. Pause between speakers to absorb what's been said. Don't formulate what you want to say while someone else is speaking. Okay, that's like talking over them, actually. Speak for yourself only. Express your own thoughts and feelings. Refer to your own experiences and avoid being hypothetical. Steer away from broad generalizations. I know this is not always easy. Don't challenge what others say. Listen to the group as a whole and to those who have not spoken aloud, as well as to those who have. Generally leave space for anyone who may want to speak a first time before you speak a second time. And hold your desires and opinions, even your convictions, lightly. So, Jake, I'm going to count on you to, I see that we have a number of hands up, but I'm going to count on you to sort of call on folks as you see them. And we've got a good 30 minutes for question and response time. So you've heard a call. Now, how about your response?
All right, let's go to Sheila Richards.
Good morning.
Hi, Sheila. Good to see you.
Thank you. Two quick things. First, at Ring Lake Ranch many, many years ago when Marcus was there, he and my husband got in a to do one evening after Marcus's presentation, and Marcus was sure he was right, and Carlisle was certain that he was wrong, that he was right. And Marcus was gentle and compassionate. He was never confrontive, but they went off to bed that night, each thinking that each was right. And the next night, Marcus began the session by saying, "Carlisle, I was wrong and you were right." Can you imagine that? Can you?
No.
Right. The other thing I want to share, especially for our speaker, oh gosh, and it went away again, about interruptions. We don't like to be interrupted. And this is from an Anglican digest. It's anonymous. I've had it since the late 70s or early 80s, and this is what it says. When you're exasperated by interruptions, try to remember that the very frequency may indicate the valuableness of your life. Only the people who are full of help and strength are burdened with other people's needs. The interruptions, which we often chafe at, are our credentials or our indispensability. The greatest condemnation that anybody could incur, and it's a danger to guard against, is to be so independent and so unhelpful that nobody ever interrupts us and we are left comfortably alone.
Thank you for that, Sheila. I want to say a couple things. One, the story about Marcus being gracious is not at all surprising to me, as you would expect. And the second thing is that I hate people who interrupt, and so there may be some confusion about the talk I just gave. So I want to make clear that it doesn't mean talking while other people are talking, which we just saw a kind of depressing example of in the White House, where interruption is used as a form of power. And in communication studies, the data makes it clear that men interrupt far more often than women do, as a way of holding on to power and exercising power. So thanks for your comments very much.
Okay, Sylvia Carlson.
Yes, thank you. I've been such an admirer of Marcus's work. I'm a retired Presbyterian clergywoman, and reading his Meeting Jesus Again for the first time meant a huge deal to me, because I was beginning to wonder what on earth I was doing. And so I so much have appreciated this today, Robin Meyers. There were times when you were speaking when I was bursting into tears, because I've been so frustrated, well, since November, but especially since January 20th, first enraged and then wanting to weep most of the time, and writing to calling senators and representatives. And I don't preach very often, but I'm going to be doing a Lenten service on a Wednesday in a couple of weeks. And you've just reinforced my need to be truthful. I know that at this particular church where I once served and where I am often invited to pinch hit, shall we say, many of the people, most of the people there pretty much know where I'm coming from. Although no one has ever said to me, like I've heard at some churches where I've preached, "I hated your sermon, it was political."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, yeah, it was, because that's what, Jesus was political, and that's what got him strung up. So anyway, thank you so much. I've really appreciated this. And I'd like you to respell enthymeme.
Oh, ENTHYMEME, enthymeme.
Thank you. Thank you. I had it without the Y. I had an E instead of a Y. Thank you so much.
It's a great word, and it's a really intriguing idea. And about your preaching, first of all, thank you for all the times you have said what you really believed. We need so much more of that in the church. There's a rhetorical equation for preachers. If a preacher is willing to risk being disliked or creating discomfort, and someone tells them in the line going out, "I just didn't agree with anything you said today and you say back to them, that's okay, I love you anyway, then it's just like our families. I mean, we're not always going to agree on things. However, the next time that preacher says something that very same person did agree with, it will be far more impactful. Because if preachers are not willing to cause discomfort, neither can they really inspire.
And the other thing that you brought up is this whole concept of God as male.
Mm-hmm.
And it grates on me more and more and more, especially as I keep hearing people in that place on Pennsylvania Avenue in DC uh, uh, describing themselves as something Christian. Anyway, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Okay, Susie D'Amico.
Good morning, Marianne and Robin. Thank you both. Robin, the last few minutes of your talk really resonated with me, and all of Second Saturday and Marcus's work helped me get through some of the things you talked about, like Jesus' birth and death, and faith versus worship. That was especially tripping up for me because I felt that worship was very empty and faith was confusing. The Sermon on the Mount is something so dear to me, and to hear people after Bishop Buddy's comments to the president being criticized for that was just and I've always been so frustrated with the Nicene Creed, particularly because it crushed the Celtic Christianity. So thank you for reinforcing my opinion.
You're welcome.
I especially appreciate, and this is what I'm struggling with now, is when I was in Luther League in high school, I was asked what being a Christian was. And I said, the person who follows the ways and teachings of Jesus. And I was told, no, that's not right. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the moment when the pain of being in church and my disconnect with all of that happened and left me floundering. I'm going to be 64 next month, and it's been a tough 50 years. So I really appreciate that level that you've talked about here, because it really identifies my experience. And I'm really grateful, of course, to Marianne always for this, but I hadn't heard of you, and I'm definitely going to look up some of your work. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Susie, very much. And since you brought up Bishop Buddy, and everyone saw that and responded to that, or a lot of people did, it may have been the most eloquent response that a president has ever made to a sermon to help us recognize the gospel itself, as opposed to genuflection dressed up as a sermon. And I was of course outraged by it, but I was also strangely encouraged by it, because the one thing that keeps me hopeful right now is that I really do believe everything's connected to everything else everywhere all the time, and there are consequences that accumulate to the decisions we make and the things we do, and sometimes the very mean-spirited ways we are in the world, and they backfire, they blow up, they set the stage for a return to a different kind of being. And that's what I'm going to hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah, I love how Robin talks about a theology of consequence.
You know, I tell my students, you may not think that holding the door open for someone today is any big deal. You know, you're supposed to. Someone's coming behind you, just hold the door open for them. And they say thank you. Just like anytime you give money to a panhandler, they say, God bless you, or thank you. And you think, well, that was no big deal. Well, it is not up to us to decide what is a big deal? Because the person we held the door open for may be more likely to hold the door open for someone else, and it may change in some small but significant way the shape of their day. And that chains out and changes something, which changes something, which changes something, which changes everything. So I'm now a quantum theologian, and I'm hoping everyone will ask me, what in the hell does that mean?
Yeah, right. And the butterfly effect, right?
Which was the greatest title ever given to a scientific paper, which shows that rhetoric is very important even for scientists. Will a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil cause a tornado in West Texas? If I had been at that conference, I would have wanted to go to that paper just because of the title. And you know, he was a meteorologist. The person who came up with chaos theory was a meteorologist. And he was trying to figure out how this utterly complex system of factors caused the weather to be what it was. And he was running his program on an old computer at MIT, and it was taking forever. And he came back from lunch and he just rounded off by a 10,000th of a factor one of the variables and left again. And when he came back, the entire result of his experiment had changed drastically. So apparently, there is no factor, no variable too small to affect complex systems. And I think that has theological implications.
Yeah, great. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to Brent Woodard.
Robin, thank you. I have a friend who's an addiction counselor, and he has passed on to me that, like, when parents have a child who's addicted, they have to be so careful not to push their child too much, because they get a pushback that's, I think, called psychological reactiveness. If you push too much, then you get this reactive pushback. And it seems to me that this is something in human nature, and it's what we've seen in America. We see all the time. If we push people, we get this unhelpful, unnecessary pushback. And I heard it in a commentary of the loss of the election, that the libs and the Dems and progressives, in their language and so on, pushed so far to the left, then there was this pushback to the right. So it seems to me, I really like what you said today, but the term being wise as serpents and innocent as doves, how do we be wise as serpents? Not just like parents of addictive people have to be so wise in how we help people with addictions. We have to be so wise in, I guess, the process of change. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I have spoken elsewhere and written elsewhere about the idea that if we don't look long and hard at the mistakes we made as Democrats, we are missing an opportunity to shape our message more effectively going forward. I believe that we concentrated on a handful of issues so exclusively that it sounded like we were ignoring the others, and that caused a backlash. And so we're going to have to be careful not to practice our own form of identity politics, because I think we have done that. And I think perhaps the sort of stupor in which the Democrats find themselves will create the opportunity for them to think about how they pursue justice for everyone and equality for everyone, and not just talk so exclusively about some subsets of human beings that they caused the very backlash they did not want. I think that's what you're saying about this phenomenon that you're talking about. I hope I understood it correctly. And I'm in complete agreement. I think the Democrats absolutely blew it by not making it crystal clear that in addition to the sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of which are words that everyone would agree with are positive words, was to the exclusion of a paycheck that will buy enough groceries to feed a family anywhere in America. that people who were not necessarily, who have never heard of the word infamy, for example, have seen their money run out. And although they may be queasy about LGBTQ plus issues, I think the progress that was made there is astonishing. And that there are a lot of people that we might call in Oklahoma good old boys in their trucks who do not seem to me to be anti-gay, but they have told me that they just don't want to hear about it all the time. And whether that's fair or not, Democrats have to pay attention to that, because otherwise we hurt the causes and the groups we believe in so strongly.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Great.
All right, Kate Gibbs.
Hello, Kate.
Hi, Kate.
Thank you, Robin. The guy that spoke just before me, he's my minister.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. Thank you.
Yep, friend.
Keeping
Yeah.
his identity a secret, obviously.
So good order of speakers.
Yes,
Not-
exactly. Right. Red
not
was your
sure-
warm-up act.
Yeah, exactly. Not sure if he wanted me to mention that, but anyway, great guy. And thank you for your message today, Robin. I don't know if you meant to do this, but because it's a serious message, but you did make me chuckle a little bit with your just some of the things you said about putting it plainly to some of your excuse me, they made me chuckle a bit, and it was really a great tribute to Marcus. You know, Marianne, I don't know if you're a talk show kind of person or not, but you know, shows like I don't know, Kelly and Mark. I don't know if you've heard of that, or it's a husband and wife that do a talk show every day of the week, and I don't know, it'd be cool if Marcus was still around, because then you
Yeah.
can do your
Yeah. Right, the
and-
Marcus and Marianne show, but it's the Robin and Marianne show today. And I think, as I said in my invite to all of you, Marcus is not here, which oh my goodness, I miss him terribly. But Robin is.
Hey, Kate, can I say something to you, just kind of personal to you, if it's all right? I would like to meet you because I think you have some kind of very extraordinary spirit
She
inside
does.
yourself, and I don't know how you can tell that
Thank
over
you.
Zoom, but I'm gonna just take a leap of
You
faith.
have a witness. I've talked, Kate is a wonderful participant and contributor to Second Saturday. And Kate has a discerning and loving and poignant heart that she shares with us. And so you're absolutely right. She's a Canadian.
Of course.
Yes, of course, exactly.
Of course, and you're polite. You're polite on top of everything else. Right?
With us. And Kate, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to make an apology. There was somebody I think it was either in the chat or maybe in the small group meeting we had last time, where somebody said, Marianne doesn't, means well, but she shouldn't make a joke about Canada. Canada becoming the 51st state, because I think that I've said to you, you might become, and so I want to apologize, because I think one reason I laughed it off is because I just thought, that's impossible, that's ridiculous, but it's more serious now. I mean, it's very disturbing.
Yeah.
So I love having you as a neighbor, but I don't want to make light of the fact that our horrible rhetoric and tossing around, maybe Canada can become the 51st state. It's outrageous. So I
Oh,
just want to say that to our Second Saturday people. My apologies for at one point making light of it.
I sure didn't take offense to it. I mean, it is getting more serious.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody watches hockey, but I don't. But my mom does, and that was quite a. I
Yeah.
don't know. That was quite a stressful game. But
Yeah. I was
Well,
cheering for Canada. I just want you to know.
yeah, yeah. So you've got friends here. Kate, I know that I've been interrupting you, but because we've got a bunch of hands up, I'm going to go to the next person. But I am
Thank you.
yeah, I'm so glad that you're here and Robin discerned rightly, and isn't it amazing? Even on Zoom, we know who you are.
I wish I could meet the two of you in
Yeah,
Might
person.
happen. Might happen.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Okay, yeah, great to see you, Kate. Thanks so much. So glad you're part of this.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Bye.
Bye bye. Yeah, Kate is a treasure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Treasure.
Let's go to Jill.
Yes, first I want to start out with a complaint. At the beginning of the talk, you listed all of Robin's books. You know, you really have now increased the budget I need for buying books. And then as you were talking, Robin, as you
It will
were
return to you 1,000-fold.
1,000 times.
Don't
I
worry
hope
about
so.
a thing.
Yes. It's like reading Marcus, it's
It will
anyway.
return.
You mentioned empathy at the beginning, and I just saw this quote by Elon Musk that he made on 28th of February this year. He said, "The fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy."
Wow.
And I thought, oh my God, I guess this is anti-woke.
Well, and you remember, Jill, I think the last time that we met that I quoted Walt Whitman, who said that a man who walks a furlong without empathy, without sympathy, walks to his own funeral.
Yes, yes.
So make note.
Yeah. And the other thing, Robin, is when you were reading this letter to Marcus, and you were describing how we interacted with people and talked to people. And as you were reading that, what came to mind were the professors Marcus and I had at Concordia College. They were marvelous people. And when you were talking, what immediately popped up in my mind was Lloyd Svensby, who taught Old Testament and New Testament. And we were reading Mark in New Testament. And I had a question after class, and he listened. Then he said, "Chell, what if Jesus was not the Son of God? What would we have?" And he turned around and left. And I'm standing there with my jaw down, thinking, wait a minute. I didn't learn this in Luther League or Sunday school or anything. And that set me off on this spiritual journey. I have been trying to, why do we believe what they say we have to believe? And I agree with you. Nicene Creed just leaves me cold. It may reflect the 2nd and 3rd century Greek thought, but it certainly doesn't reflect what I read in the Gospels. And I'm trying to understand why Luther didn't like the book of James, because he believed it was justification by faith, when James said faith without works is dead. And so I'm trying to balance these things, and I've come up with the idea that there's grace, and then there's a response, and our response to grace is the works we do to our fellow man and hold them in a loving relationship, no matter how idiotic they may behave. And so I'm beginning to take that as my two bookends of life: grace and being kind.
Sounds like a
And
good
so
plan.
that's it.
Yeah. Good for you. About empathy, we are living through a time of a severe retraction. We have an empathy gap or empathy deficit, and there's a lot of social science research to back this up. And there was a kid at a school recently that got knocked down and had been beat up and was lying there crying, and there were a group of students standing by laughing, laughing about it. And the other crazy reversal that we need to name is that J.D. Vance recently described our obligations toward other people in the exact reverse order of the gospel. He said, first, you should be concerned about your family, then your extended family, then your close friends, then your not so close friends, and then finally, strangers. I don't know if any of you heard this, but if we're at the point where we don't recognize the gospel at all, so we're just saying whatever we want to say about it. In fact, you're supposed to pay attention to the stranger first, and then work your way back to the family who you may have to turn against and hate, because Jesus is calling for a decision, even if it means not accepting your family. And in fact, the language is stronger than that in Matthew, of course. Another one of those things I wish Jesus had never said.
Yeah. Love, grace, and empathy are not transactional.
No. And everything happening right now in the political leadership of this country is transactional, and it is profoundly narcissistic.
Oh, definitely. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
By the way, I really encourage people to read Robin's books. You'll get caught up, if you will, on the development of the early community and the creeds and things about the Jesus seminar and what might go back to Jesus, what is suggested, a lot of developments in the church. So you'll get a nice modern history of what is going on in the church and in theological studies by reading Robin, and his writing is very, very clear and accessible. And so anyway, I highly recommend that you spend time with him.
I have to share a certain amount of the royalties with Marianne for that particular paid political announcement.
It'll come back to you 1,000-fold.
There you go, yes.
We have time for another one or two. And then for those who haven't been able to, we haven't had time for you here, Robin will be joining us for what we call our coffee time. And that has become an extension of more question and response time. So for those of you who can stay for coffee time, we will take in more questions then. But we can take in another couple questions right now.
Okay, let's go to Peter Davey.
Peter, are you there? And do you want to put your camera on?
Oh, is my camera not on? Sorry.
Not at the moment. You can certainly talk to us, but if you can find where the video thing is and take the little slash off of it, we can see you too.
It's just, I'm actually totally blind, so I'm using a screen reader, but just a moment.
He can get away with anything with that accent, though.
Yes, you can. Well, carry on. I mean, even if you can.
I see a Robin up there that shares my name, Robin Russell. It's a good name, Robin. Just want you to know. It's a very good name.
Peter, are you still there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So why don't you just talk to us?
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry to hold things up. Yes, I just wanted to say, Robin, that I absolutely loved what you were saying. And, I'm absolutely, that you were saying that, what's happened in the last couple of months, this is absolutely the most significant thing that's happened, certainly in my lifetime, and that you're naming it as what it is. The world has changed, whatever direction it takes. this is a world-changing moment for us. So I'm speaking from Scotland, and I mean, one of the things. By the way, I loved what you were saying about quantum entanglement, and
Yeah.
it reminded me of the quote of the British mathematician, one of the early physicists involved in quantum theory, of Paul Dirac, who said, pick a flower on Earth and a distant star is moved.
Mhm.
And I think that gives us hope. But the thing I also wanted to mention is one of the most despicable things that's going on, I think, in the world with the violence that's happening, whether it's Gaza or Sudan or Ukraine, is how children are being targeted,
Mhm.
and it just reminded. I wonder if you would agree with me that it highlights one of the perhaps the greatest, excuse me, of all time, when Jesus was with his disciples and overheard them saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom?" And Jesus said, "Excuse me," and took a little child and said, "You know, unless you turn and become like this little child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." And so this whole MAGA thing. How can anyone who is suggesting that they are Christian suggest that greatness is about power and violence and and money and so on?
Peter, that was beautifully said. And I was two things I want to say in response. One, I got to go to the UK on a book tour about 10 years ago, and I was going all over the UK on these high speed Virgin Atlantic trains. And I was thinking at the time, this is a pretty good life. And I was going through the Scottish countryside, and I'm telling you, Peter, I said, this must be the most beautiful place on earth. I'd never been to Scotland. That's number one. Number two, what's happening in many places in the world, but I'm going to talk particularly about Gaza, is that there was an article in the New York Times that a lot of children were being brought in to hospitals with single gunshot wounds to the back of their heads. That is, they had been summarily executed. And I almost couldn't read this, but that just doesn't mean it's not true. And one of the things that can happen to any of us, is that we can start to think of ourselves as chosen. That the idea of chosenness may be the most dangerous religious idea ever hatched. Ronald Reagan thought Americans were chosen and that God had put the country in between these great oceans to protect us in some way because we are chosen. The minute that a group of people become chosen, then everyone else is by definition unchosen. And that's a dangerous situation.
Mm. Yeah. Yes, thank you. And just one uh, uh, footnote. I remember, Marianne, you and your husband came to Scotland, and I was lucky enough to be at the I think it was the invitation of Richard Holloway, and
Yes,
I was
yes.
lucky enough to hear you speak. In fact, I
Oh,
remember
my
being in
dear.
a lift with you both, but never actually had a chance to speak to you. But
Oh, my goodness.
so, but I was so impressed by by Marcus, and you know, have loved his work and ever since. And so anyway, thank you.
Oh my goodness, Peter, thank you for remembering that, because I remember going to that conference, and Richard Holloway is, he's marvelous. Richard and Jean are just marvelous, marvelous people. And so, but thank you for just saying, we've been in a lift together.
Exactly.
And now we meet, not quite face to face, but
No.
but what a wonderful connection. And yes, you and I share our great admiration and love for Marcus. So that ties us in quite an important way, you and I, and for
Well,
Richard
definitely.
Holloway as well. But
That's our quantum entanglement.
Yes.
indeed, indeed, and the best kind of entanglement, very distinct from enmeshment.
Exactly.
Oh, Peter, thank you, and
Thank you.
yeah, so glad that we're still doing that. We're carrying on the way that we are. This is great.
It is brilliant. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you so
lovely.
much.
Lovely. Oh my, wow.
See, you never know.
Oh, that's just, yeah. Oh my. Okay, I think actually we have time for one more, and then we'll move to I want to do a brief close and say something about our next meeting and the closing music, and then we'll go to coffee time. But so why don't we go ahead to Robin?
Thank you.
That threw me for just a second. I thought I was done.
The best name. Thank you so much for your message and for your books. I also had never heard of you until Marianne mentioned you, and went and listened to a couple of your sermons on YouTube, and have read this last couple of weeks, The Underground Church, and oh boy, I'm so glad I found you. Two things that particularly resonated with me today was this idea that it may be too late, that action has to be immediate. And the second thing was that our reaction should be bodily. I was here last month and talked about, where is everybody? What's going on? And somebody in the chat messaged me about Indivisible. And since then, I've been out on the street in Bangor, Maine at demonstrations, and how empowering it is to be actually taking physical action along with the calls and the letters is empowering. It lifts the depression a little bit. The other thing that I wanted to respond to was about the transactional nature of this government. So I live in Maine, and I teach at our state university, and our governor was brave enough to stand up to Donald Trump at a governor's meeting, and when he was attacking our state laws on DEI issues, and what she said was, "See you in court." And
Yes.
the very next day, the Department of Education issued an immediate emergency audit of our school and cut grants on ocean ecology. Being in the ocean, we're a Sea Grant university, cut those Sea Grants, including for work that was already done, and maybe the courts can reverse that, but cut like a lot of jobs on these grants. And it was like a pouting toddler, like, dare to stand up to me and I'll show you. So keep getting that message out. Love hearing it. And thank you so much for being with us. And I wish you were closer. I'd drive 5 hours to go hear you.
You know, I interviewed once for a Congregational church in Bangor,
Oh,
and they picked someone else
Hammond Street.
To be the pastor of a UCC church in Bangor.
Mhm.
The old church in which
It
the
was the
inspiration
teaching
came
congregation.
to write Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Okay.
Anyway, and you know that, I don't know what the story behind your name is, but I was born on the first day of spring. And so my parents did that thing where you name the child something that corresponds with the circumstances under which she or he was born. And so they called me Robin because it's the bird of spring in North America. So there you go. It's a good name.
Somebody told me it meant brighten spirit. So
yes, I like that too. Yeah. But thank you so much. Go out there and keep protesting, and remember that there's a real weird, delicate balance we have to have about protesting. There are actually some people in power who are just fine with protests because it proves that we can blow off steam and we live in a democracy, and then you're going to put your signs away and go home and nothing's going to change. So in addition to protesting, find ways to be in non-compliance with what's happening. In other words, to be obstructionists, to gum up the works, because companies are not really so threatened by protests as they are terrified by boycotts.
There's an economic boycott going on right now for a week, starting yesterday against Amazon.
Yeah, yeah, yep, good, good. Carry on.
Great. Great, Robin, so good to see you this time. Yeah, and delighted that you're gotten involved with Indivisible too. That's just great.
It helps.
Yes, good, good, good. So glad. I know that the next in the queue is Jim High, and Robin, I know you know Jim. So
Yeah.
Jim, can you stay for coffee time? Yes, good.
Yeah.
We'll hear from you there. And then if those of you also who are in the queue can stay, I would love that. And we'll continue the conversation in just a few minutes. To close, I want to make one announcement. I want to say something about our next second Saturday, which is on April 12th. And we'll have another special guest, Mark Oakley. He's the Dean of Southwark Cathedral in London. He lives and languages the importance of the arts and faith, the art of faith, and faith in the arts. I first learned of him from his book, The Splash of Words, and the subtitle for that is Believing in Poetry, which has got a nice double entendre, believing in poetry. And he suggests that the poetic medium, this is his word, interrupts our snoring. So Mark Oakley says that the poetic way of going about things interrupts our snoring. So we need to be interrupted even as we need to interrupt. So he's a wonderful, wonderful human being. He obviously he's in London. He'll be tuning into us from across the pond. I'm delighted that he can be with us. He was also influenced by Mark's work. So please make a note of April 12th, where Mark Oakley will be our guest. I want to say something about the closing music that I've chosen for today. It's almost 6 minutes long, and it is a familiar spiritual to many of you. There is a balm in Gilead. And the performers for this is the Theodicy Jazz Collective, and they recently performed actually at Trinity Cathedral in Portland. Let me just say a little bit about that phrase from Jeremiah 8:22, where Jeremiah asks, "Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there?" Gilead was known for its medicinal balm. So is there no balm in Gilead? And Jeremiah was lamenting the suffering of people now under a Babylonian captivity, who I think he described them as being cracked cisterns who can no longer hold living water. So there's an African-American spiritual who borrows from that question in Jeremiah, written in the late 19th century, that dares to respond to this dilemma with hope in the face of hopelessness and courage in the face of despair. And what I want to read to you is a reflection by Howard Thurman on this spiritual. He writes, "The slave caught the mood of the spiritual dilemma. Is there no balm in Gilead? And with it did an amazing thing." Thurman writes, "He straightened the question mark in Jeremiah's sentence into an exclamation point. There is a balm in Gilead, exclamation point." And Thurman goes on to say, in times of even temporary cessation from struggle, or in times of greatest conflict, the dream of peace continues to nourish the hope of humanity. The dream persists, even though we do not know what peace on earth would be like because it has never been experienced. Hope is fed by a conviction deeper than the processes of thought that the destiny of humanity is good. It is this spirit that is captured by this spiritual. Yes, there is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. The day that this conviction leaves the spirit of humanity, the day that that conviction leaves the spirit of humanity, our moment on earth is over. And the last fond hope of humanity perishes from the earth forever. And a lonely God languishes while God's dreams go silently to dust. I'm posting that quote as one of our closing slides. So Howard Thurman is saying to us, calling to us as the spiritual is, where is the balm in Gilead? It is up to us to ask, where is it? What is it? It's up to us to be it. It's up to us to be it. And as Robin said, make haste. We don't have much time. Robin, would you send us off with a benediction? And
I
then,
would, yeah.
and then I will we'll be playing the closing music. We'll have our closing slides, and then I'll see those of you who can be with us in about 5 minutes for
Sure.
coffee.
And here's a favorite. This is a benediction I used for many years at Mayflower, and I've sort of taken it around with me every place I've gone and taught it to people. It's very simple, and it's brief. But when you hear the words "love one another," you all respond every single other. And to do that, you'll have to be ready to unmute your audio. Okay.
Great.
That way we can have a little sound at the end of this. So
Right.
again, when you hear love one another, unmute and say every single other. Okay. All right. And now may the love of God and the peace of our teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, go with every one of us, abiding in us, lifting us up, and making us whole. Go in peace, pray for peace, wage a little peace, and love one another.
Every single
other.
That was beautiful.
Robin, thank you. Thank you. And for those of us who can continue at coffee time, see you in a few minutes. Robin, your time with us is so important and so timely.